All right. All right, here we go. Buenas todos hamjugwana hujung ni umeegagi internet. Half a day. This is another episode of Fanachu. And so I am normally the host of Fanachu, lo gofmagov. I am very happy today because I am not the host. I will just be handing it off to Pulan, who will be speaking and who will be educating and who will be knowledge giving. No, I'm just kidding. Pulan Speaks, Edward Leon Guerrero will be the host for today's Fanachu episode. He'll be talking to Famalao'an Rights, a wonderful organization, the only reproductive justice organization on Guam today. And so I'm excited to hear more from all of them. But before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that Fanachu is community supported, indigenous and independent media. And so everything that we do is made possible by all of you. And so remember that you can sign up to support Fanachu on Patreon, patreon.com/Fanachu. And by doing so, you get access to certain perks, special episodes, such as the Secret Guam podcast. So last week, the Secret Guam podcast episode focused on J.D. Crutch when he first released his album in the late 1970s and how it was a transformative moment for Chamorro music at that time. Because as they used to say, as J.D. Crutch himself said once, in the 60s when he was growing up, if Chamorro music was on the radio, his friends would change the dial. But then what happened with the inauguration of J.D. Crutch is that suddenly there was Chamorro music which reflected the post-war, increasingly urban sensibilities of the Chamorro people. And it was what sort of caused a big shift in Chamorro music. And so if you like deep dive conversations like that into Chamorro history, Chamorro culture and language, then sign up as a patron for Fanachu. Now, Pulan, so Hogo Pogo, and I'm going to pass it off to Pulan. Si dus masi talunay na un sogwito esti na rekla esti. Sa sinyo an introduci asunto pogod zan esti dos bisitata loqui. Esta.
Sedus Masi Miguel for that tremendous introduction. I'll have you do my eulogy one day. And so, yes, Guahusi Edward Leon Guerrero, and I am here together with the Famalao'an Rights group. And I would just, before we start, Kiana and Ha'ani, would you just mind giving just a short introduction about yourself, just so we could get to know you a little better?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kiana Yabut. I am the Chief Development Officer over at Famalao'an Rights. I'm also an undergrad student at the University of Guam. I study political science and public administration, and I'm also the chairwoman for the Committee on Health and Human Services and Gender Affairs in the Guam Youth Congress. And I also serve as the university's representative in the Guam Youth Congress. Thank you.
Hafade Toro Hamzu, Inan Husi Ha'ani San Nicolas. I'm a PhD student at UH Manoa studying Indigenous politics. For Famalao'an Rights, I'm the Advocacy and Organizing Director. And then I work at the Commission Fino tomorrow. So yeah, a lot of hats right now, but today I'm here speaking for Famalao'an Rights.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. So let's get right into it. So first of all, what is Famalao'an Rights? What is the mission, the vision, the commitment, and what exactly are the goals of Famalao'an Rights? Who would like to answer that?
Yeah, so Famalao'an Rights is Guam's only reproductive justice initiative. We're a grassroots educational campaign. We use things like social media and community outreach mechanisms that, for pre and post COVID. And basically our mission as a reproductive justice initiative is focused on addressing the need for accessible reproductive health care in Guam. And our vision is to ensure that every person in Guam, regardless of their religious beliefs, can access affordable and timely reproductive healthcare options while having those decisions honored and supported and respected by our island community. And we have three main goals, which is to influence legislation at the local level, to create and sustain public forums to have, constructive, scientific and fact-based discussions on the different components of reproductive health care, and to establish partnerships and collaborations with different reproductive rights campaigns and organizations in order to further build our movement.
Thank you for that. And so one big part about this, the reproductive rights, is the right of the access to abortion. So the first thing is why is it important for the people of Guam to have the access to abortion providers?
Right. So just something to think about. Guam has some of the highest crime rates related to sexual assault, rape, domestic violence. I believe April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I saw an article by KUAM actually the other day. And in 2020, there were 190 reported cases of sexual assault. So just the reported ones, right? And I think that there is a misconception that if we restrict, and illegalize abortion, that nobody's going to have abortions. I think what it really does is it forces women to get underground abortions, to do home abortions. And these are really unsafe methods of getting abortions. In developing countries, it's actually the second leading cause of maternal mortality worldwide. And Guam, we're not a developing country, and so our lack of accessibility for comprehensive reproductive health care, things like the disregard for ensuring that adolescents are taught properly about sexual education, is just unacceptable. And it's important to have abortion providers, and I say it all the time, we want to give women and whoever chooses to get an abortion or just other things that are related to reproductive healthcare, because it's not just abortion, right? It's important to give them that choice, right? We're not pro-abortion, we're pro-choice. And as a woman, as somebody who, could want to get an abortion, it's important to, lay out all the options so that we can pick from the best ones. So yeah.
So that was a very important point that Kiana just said, which is it's not necessarily pro-abortion. No, it's pro-choice, the right to have that choice. You don't have to get an abortion if you don't want to, but as long as you have that choice in a safe option, instead of getting what they call back alley abortions, which is very dangerous to the woman, that is a very important part. And speaking of, you mentioned about how Guam's, not a developing country and so on. So how does Guam's access to abortion and the reproductive health care, how do those compare to other countries and other places?
I think this is a great question because, as a developing organization, we're still trying to learn ourselves. How do we par up against specifically other US territories, I think is a really good lens to look at it, but also too with other Pacific Island nations. So I just came across an article from 2021, and I can try to pull it up later. I don't remember the authors, but in a lot of surrounding Indigenous Pacifica nations and colonized areas, abortion is illegal completely, even if it's in the case of sexual assault, rape, domestic abuse, that's still illegal regardless, but there's other Pacific nations where, there's certain exceptions to that. So Guam, if you're looking at the words itself and the verbiage of our laws, it's legal, but in action and not just in theory, then we're not really practicing compared to like in Hawaii. There's only 2 Planned Parenthood centers. I believe there's more abortion centers besides Planned Parenthood. But even then, for such a huge population, there's only 2 Planned Parenthoods. Guam has 0. We have none. The last abortion provider was here in 2018. I believe Kiana can correct me if I'm wrong. But Hawaii is our closest access point to get that. And even at that, it's very costly. It's away from your family. For those who haven't flown there, it's an 8-hour journey. It's not comfortable. I believe I said you're away from family, but altogether, it's just a huge, expensive trip. And I'm sure that many people, if they would elect to have abortions, would like to have it here in Guam, because this is their home, right? So that's just kind of what we know so far about how we compare to other places. So it's mostly legal in theory and in the law and the words, but not in practice. And you can see that today.
So why then does, in practice, while legally, but why in practice does Guam lack this access to abortion? Why is that? What explains that?
I can just start and then Kiana can kind of, because I'm sure she has a better answer to this, but I think the first thing that comes to mind when people think of hindrances to abortion is obviously Catholicism as an institution. The Catholic Church at the institutional level really does kind of contradict with what we are going for as an organization. However, like Kiana said, we're not pro-abortion, we're pro-choice. And I feel like there's often a neglect in thinking of the quality of life of the woman, not just the child, but altogether, how can we, advance the quality of life for women, not just living, but having an actual good life and a healthy life. And a lot of people would say that it starts with that. There's a lot of Catholic beliefs that have become over time embedded to what people think is traditional culture or status quo. And I feel like, since we're such a close-knit community, not just Indigenous Chamorros, but just an island community altogether, it's really difficult to go against the grain, no matter what belief it is. So I think that is one of the biggest hindrances is family. Although it's obviously they're very comforting and we find sense of community in family and loved ones, it can be really hard to go against them and just straight out the gate tell them that you support abortion, because that's against the status quo for a lot of people.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that, Hani mentioned Catholicism, and about 3/4 of the island is they identify as Roman Catholic, and we know that the Catholic Church as an institution is a pro-life institution, right? They do not support any abortion access whatsoever. And just looking at it firstly from like the physician's point of view, if I was a physician that wanted to practice abortion here, there's a lot of fear that is instilled because it's scary coming to work, right? And there are protesters outside of your clinic every single day. And even when you're a woman who, if we had an abortion provider would want to get one, there would be protesters outside, possibly harassing you or whatever. So there's been instilled a lot of fear. And I think when we talk about abortion access, it's important to realize that Guam, 6 out of 15 senators here, from when the ACLU lawsuit did, like when the whole news blew up about the ACLU lawsuit, PDN came out with an article. They sent interview questions to the senators asking if they would basically be willing to change the law to be less restrictive. And at least 6 out of the 15 of them, and you can check out the article yourself on PDN, said no. And that's a really, really big problem, because if we can't do anything at that level to change legislation, to just take out what they were asking for, that abortions don't need to be performed, we face so many problems, underneath the ladder. And, I think that's a really big reason why we lack abortion access too, is, obviously we have the Catholic Church, but when we have legislators who aren't willing to be on our side, that's also a really big issue.
Can I just add to hearing Kiana talk, it's also a lack of education. I think it's been so unilaterally anti-abortion that we fail to teach or even want to learn the other side of the coin. And I feel that when we're not open to learning or dialoguing, even having discussions like this, then we just become ingrained in that idea. So that can also be another way that, our movement is being hindered, or people don't want to, just don't want to learn about it too.
So I heard the mention of the legislatures, or at least some of them. I heard the mention of the Catholic Church, which is a very sensitive topic and which we will explore further on. And I heard also about, the lack of education and that we need to have more of these conversations. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, this conversation was brought up in my family, and I just mentioned, hey, maybe the woman should have the right to choose and so on. And immediately, my aunties was like, huh? I just got this blast, this Aten Baba look at, like, oh my goodness, it's like I took the last piece of food on the fiesta table. So my question then is, how do we approach our family members? How do we educate them about this topic when they have these preconceived biases against even discussing about this topic?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one because like I just mentioned earlier, we're such a close-knit community that we also don't want to hurt the feelings of our family members and other loved ones if we have polarizing views. And I think the first thing, it might be cliche, is just having the courage to have that conversation because you truly never know what the other person's going to say. It might, the worst case scenario is they, maybe cut you off or disagree with you, but just having, that intent and desire to have that conversation in the first place, I feel is a really good place to start. And then also too, with everything on Zoom and the, online nowadays, there's so much access to resources that we might not have had, with our Manyaina's age, right? Back in the day, they'd have to probably go to the library just to learn about these things, or it was through word of mouth, and gossip. So I think too, just having not only the courage to talk about it, but to look it up, or even, message our organization or someone else that is also interested to take the first steps in dialoguing and educating yourself too. Because once you educate yourself, I feel like you'd be more comfortable educating others when you have the facts and statistics and everything.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that really quickly, I think being pro-life, like if you are a pro-life person, it comes with a lot of things. And if I think it's important to also have a conversation, because what comes with Catholicism is what we teach, children in public schools is we teach them about abstinence, right? Family planning. And these are kind of what all we teach them when it comes to sexual education. When I was in middle school, my teacher was very religious. And, I specifically remember him like skipping through that chapter. Like we just skipped the chapter and he just said like, oh, just, don't have sex, blah, blah, blah. And, we know that's not effective, right? If adolescents, people ages 15 to 19 are going to have sex, then we should, as a government, as a community, do everything that we can to ensure that they know what they're getting themselves into. And something that I stress a lot is if you're not okay with the last step in the process, which is abortion, then you need to do everything you can to ensure that every single step before that, contraceptive, sexual education, making sure that our adolescents are safe, everything before that needs to be set in place already. If you're not okay with that last one, then you should at least try to understand that the steps before that are also super necessary in protecting our young women and our adolescents.
And then with that education, Kiana, I'm thinking of my own experience because I've been in Catholic school my whole entire life prior to college, and we were never educated on that either. It's kind of, really hush hush, or you talk about it among your friends, but then there's so much miseducation that goes into that. And then obviously there's a lot of teen pregnancies that get swept under the rug, or, things happen in our families that we don't want to confront head on. So I think too, dissolving shame around the subject would be really important, because a lot of people feel shameful for asking, or feel like, I don't want to be disrespectful, or it's kind of this gross thing that we just push under the rug. But I think also just coming with the open mindset that we can talk about things, not just abortion, but other things, would create such a bigger openness in our community to, just dialoguing about it. I think that's so critical.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that right there, which is just the ability to have these conversations. And no matter how much you fear or how much you feel mamalao to talk to your older family members or your aunties or your grandmother about this sensitive topic, just have that courage to at least speak about it. And, and at least if anything, you could educate yourself so that you may educate other people, especially those who are more open-minded. That was a very excellent point. And so going back then to the Catholic Church and our Chamorro culture, in quotation marks. So the question is then does this pro-choice position, does the mission, the vision, the goals of Famalao'an rights, is there an inherent conflict with the Catholic Church and the Chamorro culture? Or, will they always be diametrically opposed, or is there a possibility for both of these positions to be compatible, or is this just a false dichotomy?
That's a great question. And I want to tread very respectfully with this because, I'm someone who grew up in the Catholic faith and I very much identify with my Chamorro culture. So I believe that, Famalao'an rights, our name Famalao'an already is kind of this hint to, we are advocating for not only women and young girls, but also gender nonconforming individuals and non-binary folks who need this access to reproductive health care. And also too, as you trickle down, if you want to, look at it, it also impacts men, lalahi, right? So I think that the core values of our organization is pro-choice, is bodily autonomy, self-determination of our own body. And, in ancient Chamorro matrilineal society, women had so much power, so much so that, power and prestige came down from the woman line. I forget, there's more, specific verbiage to that. But in that way, I feel like we're honoring our ancestors and the Famalao'an who came before us because we're trying to create that path for future generations of Famalao'an and those who identify as something else. So I don't think we're antithetical to Chamorro culture, but I feel like some people would say, as I mentioned earlier, that Chamorro culture today has religious motifs, which is undeniable, right? We have Chamorro rosaries, tetsas. There's such a confluence of Chamorro culture and religion that come together in a way that people perceive as tradition or Chamorro culture. And I feel like traditionalism and traditions can be very harmful, but we as Indigenous people and also settlers or whoever else lives here or visits have a responsibility to check tradition and see when it fits us, and we have that power to change it as Indigenous Chamorro people, right? So I don't think that we could say that it is traditional to be pro-life per se, but I would say that with what I've studied and, knowing that our ancient society was very matrilineal, we are going back to that idea of self-determination of our body. And also too, I believe, I need to pull up this again, but we do have records from early Spanish era that abortions were done and that they weren't chastised for it or stigmatized. So I would say at the institutional level, at doctrine, we are antithetical to the institution of the Catholic Church, but we are not against individual Catholics or those who have different beliefs than us. There's also a group, right, Kiana, Catholics for Choice, who acknowledge that you can exist in this realm of being Catholic, but also be pro-choice. So I hope that kind of answers that question a bit.
Kiana, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that was great. Hani is like, I know you got like, I think people see me like all the time because I do Famalao'an talks, but our team is like Hani, they're really, really great, strong, smart women. So no, I'm okay.
Yeah, Hanani, that was an incredibly well articulated answer. I especially like the part where you specifically said this, and that was just because it's a tradition, just because this is what a lot of Chamorros do, and this is considered the traditional culture, doesn't mean we have to keep it this way because it could change. We could change it. Just like how you mentioned in the past, there were records of Chamorros committing abortions, and yet they weren't chastised or whatever like they are today. So that's a very important point that you brought up. And so the next thing I want to ask is policy, on the policy level. So what exactly are possible legislation that, or ideas that you have that the senators could pass that will fit with the goals and the mission of Famalao'an rights?
Right. Actually, this question is perfect timing. I see in the chat, somebody said, can they provide any updates on the ACLU case and if it's still happening? And I was actually going to bring that up because just some quick background on it. It's a long case and you can read it online, but the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, sued the government of Guam because two medical providers in Hawaii wanted to be able to provide medication abortion via telemedicine. And according to Guam law, abortions have to be performed in an operating room in a conventional setting. So they can't do it because they could lose their license, right? Because of the wording of the law. And medication abortion is something that there's a lot of data research surrounding it. And we know that, it's a safe method of attaining an abortion. I mean, it's definitely better than an underground abortion, right? And so since somebody asked that, I think that's a great place to start. Just taking out, these little words that make it that much more difficult. Because, saying, oh, abortions need to be performed, on the surface, it seems like, yeah, great, abortion should be performed. But when we're given new medicine, new technology, new science, we really just need to get with the times. And something else that I think we could look at, it's called the Guam mandatory reporting laws, right? So there's this thing called the Women's Reproductive Health Information Act of 2012. Honestly, even like the name is such a burden to say, but basically what it does, or well, at least a part of what it does, is it requires, if you're going to get an abortion, it requires the provider to complete a report that requires 25 pieces of information about the person getting an abortion. And just as an example, these pieces of information could include the name and address of the facility, the date of the abortion, the ethnic origin of the pregnant woman, the age of the pregnant woman, what village they're living in. If you had an abortion before, what was the date of your last induced abortion? The last time you gave birth, like actually. They basically require you, they need to know 25 things about you. And this poses a super huge privacy issue, because these records are public records. And if I walked into public health, or if I even emailed them, which we have, and we have these records, by the way, at Famalao'an Rights, I could know, for example, if you're from a small village like Umatic, and you were pregnant, and then all of a sudden you weren't pregnant, and somebody got curious and they got these records, all of a sudden that person, and then eventually everybody in the small village of Umatic, knows that you got an abortion. And that's a super huge privacy issue, because there are some women who prefer to keep that to themselves, just like you would with any other medical records, like your STD results, which you can easily keep private, right? So that's a really big one for me. And another thing that the law does, it requires a 24-hour waiting period. So basically, you and your doctor sign a consent form, and then you have to wait 24 hours. And the reasoning, the logic behind this is, when you wait that 24 hours, they're also required to give you like a brochure from public health. Firstly, it's super biased, right? It's outdated, contains super inaccurate information. And then the doctor is required to tell you everything that could possibly go wrong with the abortion. And within that 24 hours, what do you think goes on in the mind of that woman? All that doubt that you just put into that woman, she's probably not likely to get an abortion anymore, because again, there's this inherent fear that's instilled, and we don't want that. There is so much science backing the safety of medical abortions if it's done in a good setting. If medication abortion is done properly, right? And it's absolutely unacceptable that I could easily find out this information. Granted, we don't even have an abortion provider anymore, but back then, when we did before May 2018, it just shouldn't happen, right? So those are some things that I think we should definitely look into when it comes to policy.
And then what I'm thinking of with policy, Kiana already touched on it, but just, cutting the red tape and eliminating scare tactic verbiage, and also to maybe looking into where we can fund reproductive health centers. Kiana, can you explain, she was discussing earlier this week about how at public health, I think one of the providers is only there once a week or during very inaccessible hours. And, it just makes it even that much more difficult to not only be a woman, but just to have simple access to these things that it should be easy to get. So I don't remember what that was, Kiana. What was that again?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Honestly, even that too. So in the Northern Public Health, which is in Dededo, they receive Title X funding from the federal government to be able to provide contraception through, the community health center. But the problem with this is, so if you wanted the I believe it's called the IUD. Firstly, the family planning clinic, which opened in October of 2019, it's only available on Thursdays and Fridays. Why Thursdays and Fridays, and why not Monday to Friday? it beats me. It really, really beats me. And at the moment, they only currently provide birth control pills, the depot shot, and condoms. However, if you wanted the IUD, which is another method of birth control, right? The nurse practitioner who is the only person who is allowed to administer that form of birth control is only there for half of the day on Friday. I mean, let's think about this, right? Because a lot of the women who go to public health centers like this, they're, or not even women, but again, the non-binary people, just anybody who's wanting this kind of treatment, they're usually on the poorer side. And, you know, Guam has a really high poverty rate per capita, and we all know this, right? And they just don't have, you know, the time to carve out of their work schedule those hours. And, you know, again, because yes, abortion is legal here and we could have the means to do it, but all of the barriers, like if abortion is here, then we just set up like 50 barriers to get to that point. And you know, that it's just unacceptable really to me.
You know, you're probably going to be a future lawyer, so I hope you could answer this question. Is that all legal? All these barriers that are being erected or that are being occurred by the business, by public health, is this legal? Does the government of Guam, under, you know, with the current interpretation of the Roe v. Wade and so on, is the government of Guam allowed to do that? And these businesses, do they have the right to do that?
Well, I know part of the issue with the family planning center in the north is funding. So, you know, and again, it's just like these little things that we won't put the funding into things like this, right? It's like those little backdoor things that really bother me. So that's part of the issue is, you know, the funding, right? And funding is like a problem. Like, I work in the government, so like funding is always going to be a problem, but you know, it's not, we can't always make that excuse like, oh, we don't have the funding for it. You know, at some point it just really gets old, right? And as for what I mentioned earlier, you know, about 25 pieces of information, the Women's Rights Privacy Act, these are all Guam law. So I guess they are allowed to do it, you know. I'm not a lawyer, at least yet, so I don't really know all the legal stuff, but you know.
One of the articles that I reference in particular a lot, but that really historicizes self-determination of body and of the island as a political status you might be interested in is Vivian Dame's piece. I forget, it's from 2003, but even then, you know, not only is that 20 some years ago, but the way she frames everything was all in the 70s, 80s, you know what I mean? And also most of the legislation that we have is based on those, which is also outdated. And then one of the laws that Kiana just referenced is from 2012. So I feel like there's also no sense of urgency in a lot of these legislators to go back and revise or look at or amend existing legislation. And just to like I said, cut the red tape, because it's just a lot of inaccessibility one after the other. So what's the point of legalizing it, which is right, like your question, if you can't really do it in practice?
Well, what do you think then is holding back the legislatures, the current senators, and even the previous senators from just, like you said, cutting this red tape? Are they fearful of the public reprisal, or I don't know?
Maybe a little bit. You know, millennials, Gen Z, they're typically the more likely to be pro-choice, like our organization, and we also happen to be like the lowest voter turnout at the elections. You know, normally the older people come to vote, right? And so, you know, perhaps they feel like this need, you know, towards their constituents to, you know, kind of stick with the status quo. And you know, a lot of the times when we try to change things, I remember like with the even things like that are not part of this organization, but things that were like the minimum wage bill, when it came up to raise the minimum wage, there was a lot of backlash because, you know, again, it's just breaking that, like that initial like, you know, the status quo in order to get to where we want to be. It's already really difficult. And again, at least in this legislature, there are a lot of pro-life senators, so I'm sure that they are not in any hurry at all to want to change the law about abortion access.
So then what could the average people like me and Juan Malamanga and my uncle, what could, and the people listening, what could we do to help out? What could we just do?
So as men, I would say, that you all have to listen first, and that's for all men on island. And then one of our founder, Maria Dolahan, mentioned that, a lot of legislation that is passed is introduced by men and then also unanimously passed because of men. So I would first say, we need to listen to what women are saying, and not only women, but our younger kids, because they see things that we can't see, the younger generation, like Kiana was mentioning, millennials, Gen Z, and also our non-binary, trans, queer folks, because they have a lot to say and they can see things in a far more expansive light than we probably could. So one is just listening. Two, being informed, like I mentioned earlier, going that extra mile to just, type something into Google or message us on Instagram or start that dialogue on Twitter. You don't have to be looking like face to face, albeit over Zoom or in person. You don't need to confront them. You could do everything, we call it silent advocacy in a sense, and then also to public advocacy. So, if you're more of the type to be an activist and go on social media or, have a protest outside, then that's more than welcomed, and then just like what I said earlier, be courageous. Kiana actually did a talk last week or the week before with Magahagalu, and it's amazing to see how much she had to go through just to, be one of those pioneers of this movement today. So, looking at our Famalao'an now and just our Magahaga and being courageous and knowing that you're not alone. There's people who are silent advocates and who are really, there for you. And the Magahaga and also Dames's piece suggested that there were nuns who also within the Catholic Church who wanted to support the movement, but they couldn't vocalize it. So, we have a lot of silent supporters everywhere. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if you have anything else, Kiana.
Yeah, again, yeah, we had the talk with Magahaga in the last Monday of March for Women's Month. And, she mentioned, if you're brave enough to be courageous enough to publicly speak, talk to people, ask questions, question the status quo about, reproductive healthcare here, then definitely do it, right? But this silent advocacy that she talks about, people behind the scenes, even Famalao'an rights. I mean, a lot of people, like, they might know my face because I'm like on Instagram every single week talking to people, but luckily we have Ha'ani on today. She's really great. Our whole team, right? They're just kind of these like invisible forces that help me out every single week. And they're just amazing people. But even in like little things, I've found advocates for pro-choice where in places that I never thought, in my classes, within professors at UOG, within younger kids who also like, kids love to ask questions. So they're always like curious and whatnot. And it's great. And so that's really important. If you're brave enough, then, be public. But if you're not, there are so many different ways. And I think one of the best ways, especially if you're a woman, is to just really educate yourself on what's happening. Because when you actualize and realize everything that's wrong, like when you realize that if something happened to you and you needed to get an abortion, that the closest place to get an abortion would be Hawaii, and that you needed to pay for your plane ticket there and back, plus your medical to get that abortion. When you realize that, a couple years ago, a 12-year-old girl was forced to carry out her pregnancy because we didn't have those options available here. When you realize all of these all of these things, they're things that in a community that is so tight-knit, that considers each other essentially as family, that care for each other so deeply, we're rooted in all of these great values. But when you realize what has happened and what continues to happen, you just realize that something's not right. And, that's what we as a grassroots organization are trying to do, is, just play our part in trying to make things right in terms of access to reproductive health care.
Kiana, you have my vote. So now let's get straight to the questions, because we're now coming at the end. So we'll start with the first question, and we already addressed this, but if you could just address it again, just real quick, is how can we talk to our elders, especially our nanas, about this? For them, being a Chamorro woman is something different than it is for me.
You know, as women, we have, especially in Chamorro culture, we have this added responsibility, whether we like it or not, to maintain our families, whether that be nurturing them through like feeding them meals, or, you know, helping our younger brothers, or to like the physical carrying on your family line. And then, you know, that also there's this argument that you have to then do that by having children, and then you know, advanced Chamorro people, et cetera, et cetera. So I completely understand why it is so like heart-wrenching and difficult to, you know, have a different view than, you know, other matriarchs and your mothers and other women, because that's some, you know, a community that you want to be a part of, and it's hard to go against the grain, like I said. So, you know, again, just I'm hitting the nail on the head here, but just having the courage to do that, it's definitely scary. I've had conversations myself with family members, you know, who were not on the same page as me, but I think knowing that, you know, again, cliche, whatever you want to say, but knowing that you still respect the person and love them regardless of belief. I feel like just me opening the door to those conversations really made women in my life kind of change their minds a little bit, knowing that, you know, I had this stance and our generation has this stance, and we want to correct, you know, some of the things that our generation before didn't address is really important. So just, you know, taking those first steps and just making space to be with, you know, your nana, whether it be your nana Biha or your actual nana, to tell them that you respect them and love them regardless.
Kiana, would you like to add anything to this question, or let's move on to the next?
No, I think we can move on to the next question.
All right. So the next question is there enough public pressure to remove anti-choice politicians and votes in pro-choice leaders?
Ooh, that is a great question. Shout out to the person who asked that question. Honestly, I think that what we need to, you know, I am a Gen Z, I'm 20 years old. So I know for like kind of like a fact that sometimes we can be like all talk and no walk, and you saw it, right, in the election, right? Like, not, you know, everybody was advocating for like the certain candidate or whatever, and then when you looked at the turnout, people just didn't show up, and for me it just didn't add up. And I think that, you know, as young people, for my generation, if we're able to mobilize, you know, our votes and just really get people out there to put the right people in office, or even to pick candidates to run for office, then I definitely think there is. But, you know, again, there's a consistent lack of young voters, and, you know, it's a big part of the problem, because we have the right to vote, and, you know, it's super, super essential that we exercise it, because, you know, in the 36, we found ourselves in a position where probably we won't be able to get anything done at the legislative level, because at least half of the senators are pro-life, and you need at least 8 votes for a bill to pass, right? So yeah, I think there is potential, but we just need to acknowledge that potential.
I think it's interesting too, because in 2019, we had the first woman majority legislative body here in Guåhan, and also the whole United States at large. So not seeing any, you know, waves come from that with regards to reproductive healthcare is a bit concerning, but I think there's never enough pressure to be put on. But like Kiana said, we need to be actively adding that pressure. And then another question that came up this week was, do we care about educating our elders if they're gonna, you know, as generation or as time goes on, they won't be the ones legislating? Or, you know, do we care to, you know, expend our time teaching them? Who do we advocate for? And, you know, my answer is we generate consciousness across generations, regardless of age level. It's always important to be, because we never know who's going to be at the seat of, you know, creating legislation or voting for it, right? So yeah, we just need to keep educating ourselves and adding that pressure.
Great answers from you both. So the next question is, do you find that other Micronesian groups are more supportive of pro-choice rhetoric or less supportive? then they just added this commentary after. I think Samorus have become more open, but I feel, at least from my own interactions, that other islander groups are not as open or supportive of these themes.
I don't have an answer for this straight out the gate, but I do know that, Hawaii is not a Micronesian group, they're Polynesian, but it's been hard to find any pro-choice movements there. I've asked my Kanaka friends, and even then they didn't know, which articles to refer me to, if there were other organizations that were similar to Famalao'an rights. And then also too, the fact that, maybe I'm in my own bubble here, or me and Kiana in our movement, but I haven't heard anything about other Micronesian groups here in Guåhan, or even, in their own island nation. So I think that's something we definitely need to look into, because that would be important to create, solidarity and awareness in that respect. But right now, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm also not super keen on the other Micronesian islands and where they stand on abortion. But yeah, I think like Ha'ani said, that's something that we can definitely look into. Maybe we can do a Famalao'an talks on it. I don't know. Yeah, just doing the research again is something that, we need to do. And, hopefully we'll have an answer for that in a little bit.
I know, Kiana, you already sort of or you basically did answer this question already, but can you provide any updates on the ACLU case? Is that still happening?
So, yeah, it's still happening. I think they had like the first part of the trial like on March 15th. Honestly, I'm not sure how it went. I'm also a student, so I've been a little bit busy. But yeah, so again, just basically the ACLU sued the government of Guam for not having the proper access to abortions and abortion through telemedicine. And attorney Vanessa Williams is the prosecutor for that, for the ACLU. And, hopefully everything goes well. And the lawsuit, powers through, and we could be able, and those two providers in Hawaii and other providers in Hawaii could be able to, what's it called? Like prescribe medication abortion to the people here who need it.
Thank you for that. So next question is, Sidus Masi Kiana Zenha'ani. What messaging have you found to be most effective when discussing this topic with pro-life loved ones?
Well, for me specifically, I just always like to use real life examples, right? I mentioned earlier, like, if you're, if I'm talking to like my grandma, for example, I'll be like, well, what if it happened to me? What if it happened to me when, and at the time when I would have this conversation with her, she's no longer with us, but, I was a teenager, and, it just kind of opens up, even if they don't agree, it kind of just opens up, more possibilities in their mind, I think. And, especially when you bring up such like awful stories, like I mentioned, that 12-year-old girl who had to carry out her pregnancy, it just allows for a little bit more compassion, I think, in their minds. And I think that's really important, is to approach them, realistically, and understand that even though they may not agree with you, and even though they may not change their stance, this is information that they should know to keep themselves informed.
Yeah, just echoing what Kiana said. And, if you can, it's difficult, but maybe, detach their belief of being pro-life than how you feel about them as a person, and then just kind of bringing them to that level that, like Kiana said, what if that happened to me or someone you loved? Kind of creating that awareness, like what kind of future do you want for not only our family, but for generations to come, even though you don't, you're not for this specific, we're not pro-abortion, right? Pro-choice. So even though you're not for abortion, maybe you can be pro-choice and just support in that way and be a silent advocate again.
Thank you for that, and for reiterating that pro-choice does not equate to pro-abortion, which is very important. So the next question is, how much does your average public school student learn about reproductive rights on Guam today?
Well, if we're looking at the statistics, I forgot what the source is, but it's on our website. All the statistics I say are on our website. So, it's all true. It's all fact-based. But between the ages of 15 to 19, every 1,000 girls in Guam, 48 of them get pregnant. whether that's wanted or unwanted, right? And again, just through my experience in middle school, it's really glossed over, I think. And I think that our students need to know more. They need to know about things like STDs, because you can't just tell them, oh, just say no, because clearly, it's not working. We can't just tell them abstain. We can't just tell them, oh, do family planning, because it's all of those things, they're clearly not working. And, again, there's so much stigma around talking about sex and sexual education in our island. And really the first step is just to be able to, I don't know if it's through enforcing the curriculum through legislation or, whatever it may be, but just destigmatizing the conversation and, talking to our children, because these children, these adolescents, they're going to be adults one day. And it's better for them to have the conversation in a safe school environment than for them to not have the conversation and then have to deal with the possible consequences. So how much does the average public school student know? I think not enough at all.
Ani, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I never went to public school. I can only offer the Catholic school perspective, but then again, it's from my own, right? I would say there's little to none. And I would also say that reproductivity and reproduction is framed in a way that only impacts women. And it's strictly about, abortion or sex. That's it. There's no explanation as to how it can impact your overall health, other like venereal diseases, what else? Just so many other things, family planning, and just the basic education of sex. So I would say that there's not only is there a lack of education, but it's so limited to the scope of what kids think, and we're not really framing it as a holistic thing in general. So if we're not teaching kids, they're going to find out on their own, and they're going to use, maybe harmful ways or methods of, getting that information or learning it or through experience. And, we're really not giving them that, the proper education to do so. I think we as a generation need to prepare them, and otherwise we're hindering them from learning altogether.
Okay, so we're gonna go through one of this comment. I just would like to hear how would you both respond to this. So this comment says, it's ironic that a movement that calls itself independent Guåhan or Famalao'an rights, if I may add, would push for the ability to murder indigenous babies in the womb. Murdering babies is not healthcare. How would you both respond to this?
Albeit that our organization does not have a firm stance on what self-determination venue we would go with, we are, at our core, pro self-determination of our body, of our land, of our mind, of our health. So I feel that, being Famalao'an rights and knowing that that is our mission to advance self-determination for, the overall scope of health for women really does align with independent Guhan, I would say, even though I don't know your mission in its entirety, but we are for the right to choose. And not only that, but to not be influenced by outside forces, not to be colonized or oppressed by other individuals. So breaking free of that and really having our own autonomy and choice in it. So I feel like it aligns perfectly with, independent Guhan and other self-determination groups, even though we're not, statehood or independence or et cetera, we are pro-choice.
Right. That's a great point. That very last sentence that you said, we are pro-choice. And this person's comment, it would push for the ability to murder babies. Again, that's not what we are, right? Reproductive healthcare, it encompasses so many things other than abortion. It encompasses things like women being able to get pap smears, right? STD testing. When we talked to the Magahaga, she had this vision of this great, like Planned Parenthood family planning clinic where you could go to get a number of things surrounding reproductive health care, whether that's, getting a pregnancy test or being able to pick up contraceptives. And all of these things are so essential in furthering the rights of women. I mean, it's just so important that we have the choice and the proper ability to easily access and, to timely access these things. So yes, that's all.
Great answers from you both. So I'm just going to ask one last question and then we'll wrap it up as we're getting at the end of the time. So last question is, has your group ever thought about getting a grant or funding some sort of exhibits about the abortion fight in the 90s?
Getting a grant or funding some sort of exhibit about the abortion fight in the 90s. I don't know if we were looking at getting funding for that specifically. We are, we're just at the moment, we're a community organization, but one day we hope to be a nonprofit so that we can receive funding, so we can further our mission in different and, better in various ways. And, hopefully being able to, because again, the fight in the 90s with Rita Bavacqua, attorney Areola, and the Magahaga, that's a really important piece of abortion history in Guam. And I think that that's a great idea, actually, is to just be able to talk about that history, to understand why we're where we are today and, how we could be better. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we had a plan specifically for getting a grant or funding to exhibit this, but something that aligns with that and our goals is to share whatever we learn and whatever histories we come across with everyone. And we're working on that. We're getting our resources together, all of our data and everything in a way that we can share it with you all. And we do that on our social media platforms every week. And yeah. We're also thankful to Dr. Bavacqua for connecting us with his mom, because she's one of the pioneers of this movement, and we are going to be speaking with her in the next few days to kind of get more information with her, and then we'll share that with everyone else.
Thank you very much, you both. So before we end, is there any last words y'all would like to say?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you so much for having us. It is truly an honor to be on such a great program like this. And I think someone also asked how they could help our organization. If you go to our Instagram at Famalao'an Rights, you click on the link. We're opening membership applications. We're looking to expand our team to kind of help us out further. So if you're interested in being a member, or if you want to do something, on the side, you can always just DM us. Our Instagram is something that, we're on all the time in order to be able to communicate with the public and to inform the public. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. We're also on Twitter at Famalao'an Rights without the S, because Twitter won't let you go for more characters, but feel free to check that out. And yes, just thank you so much for having us.
Anything you would like to say, Hani?
Sorry, no, just thank you so much, Ed Zamaget, for inviting our group Famalao'an Rights here, and for having this open dialogue and conversation with you both and with everyone who's been chiming in the comment section, because that's what we're here for. We're here for dialogue. We're here for education and all of that. So Sitos Maasi again.
So once again, we were with Famalao'an Rights with Kiana and Ha'ani. And so one of the key takeaways, again, one of the key themes, do not be mamalaw, have courage to speak to people about this topic. Don't keep it stigmatized, just talk about it, because that's what makes it destigmatized. And another thing is that just because you're pro-choice doesn't mean you're pro-abortion. That, again, just because you're pro-choice does not mean you're pro-abortion. And you could help out, exactly as Kiana said, by checking out their social media pages. And that is all. Seduce Masi, everyone, for watching and listening. All right, Esta.